Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning, we will be in Esther chapter 8, verse 1 through chapter 10, verse 3. On that same day, King Ahasuerus gave the estate of Haman, that adversary of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Now Mordecai had come before the king, for Esther had revealed how he was related to her. The king then removed his signet ring, the very one he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther designated Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's estate. Then Esther again spoke with the king, falling at his feet. She wept and begged him for mercy, that he might nullify the evil of Haman the Agagite, which he had intended against the Jews. When the king extended to Esther the gold scepter, she arose and stood before the king. She said, "If the king is so inclined, if I have met with his approval, and if the matter is agreeable to the king, and if I am attractive to him, let an edict be written rescinding those recorded intentions of Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote in order to destroy the Jews who are throughout all the king's provinces. For how can I watch the calamity that will befall my people, and how can I watch the destruction of my relatives?" King Ahasuerus replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Look, I have already given Haman's estate to Esther, and he has been hanged on the gallows because he took hostile action against the Jews. Now you write, in the king's name, whatever in your opinion is appropriate concerning the Jews, and seal it with the king's signet ring. Any decree that is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring cannot be rescinded." The king's scribes were quickly summoned. In the 3rd month, that is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, they wrote out everything that Mordecai instructed to the Jews, and to the satraps, and the governors, and the officials of the provinces all the way from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, and to the Jews according to their own script in their own language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet ring. He then sent letters by couriers on horses, who rode royal horses that were very swift. The king thereby allowed the Jews who were in every city to assemble, and to stand up for themselves, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any army of whatever people or province that should become their adversaries, including their women and children, and to confiscate their property. This was to take place on a certain day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. A copy of the edict was to be presented as law throughout each and every province and made known to all peoples, so that the Jews might be prepared on that day to avenge themselves from their enemies. The couriers who were riding the royal horses went forth with the king's edict without delay, and the law was presented in Susa the citadel as well. Now Mordecai went out from the king's presence in purple and white royal attire, with a large golden crown and a purple linen mantle. The city of Susa shouted with joy, for the Jews there was radiant happiness and joyous honor. Throughout every province and throughout every city where the king's edict and his law arrived, the Jews experienced happiness and joys, banquets and holidays. Many of the resident people pretended to be Jews because the fear of the Jews had overcome them. In the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on its 13th day, the edict of the king and his law were to be executed. It was on this day that the enemies of the Jews had supposed that they would gain power over them. But contrary to expectations, the Jews gained power over their enemies. The Jews assembled themselves in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to strike out against those who were seeking their harm. No one was able to stand before them, for dread of them fell on all the peoples. All the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who performed the king's business, were assisting the Jews, for the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. Mordecai was of high rank in the king's palace, and word about him was spreading throughout all the provinces. His influence continued to become greater and greater. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, bringing death and destruction, and they did as they pleased with their enemies. In Susa, the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. In addition, they also killed Parshandatha, Dalphon, Asphatha, Poratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arisai, Aradai, and Vizatha, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not confiscate their property. On that same day, the number of those killed in Susa the citadel was brought to the king's attention. Then the king said to Queen Esther, "In Susa the citadel the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? What is your request? It shall be given to you. What other petition do you have? It shall be done." Esther replied, "If the king is so inclined, let the Jews who are in Susa be permitted to act tomorrow, also according to today's law, and let them hang the 10 sons of Haman on the gallows." So the king issued orders for this to be done. A law was passed in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa then assembled on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not confiscate their property. The rest of the Jews who were throughout the provinces of the king assembled in order to stand up for themselves and to have rest from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of their adversaries, but they did not confiscate their property. All of this happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and then rested on the 14th day. They then rested on the 14th day and made a day for banqueting and happiness. But the Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 13th and 14th days and rested on the 15th day, making it a day for banqueting and happiness. This is why the Jews who are in the rural country, those who live in the rural cities, set aside the 14th day of the month of Adar as a holiday for happiness, banqueting, holiday, and sending gifts to one another. Mordecai wrote these matters and sent letters to all the Jews who were throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, to have them observe the 14th and the 15th day of the month of Adar each year, as the time when the Jews gave themselves rest from their enemies, the month when their trouble was turned to happiness, and their mourning to a holiday. These were to be days of banqueting, happiness, sending gifts to one another, and providing for the poor. So the Jews committed themselves to continue what they had begun to do, and to what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised plans against the Jews to destroy them. He had cast pur, that is, the lot, in order to afflict and destroy them. But when the matter came to the king's attention, the king gave written orders that Haman's evil intentions that he had devised against the Jews should fall on his own head. He and his sons were hanged on the gallows. For this reason, these days are known as Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, because of the account found in this letter, and what they had faced in this regard, and what had happened to them, the Jews established as binding on themselves, their descendants, and all who joined their company, that they should observe these 2 days without fail, just as written, and at the appropriate time on an annual basis. These days were to be remembered and to be celebrated in every generation, and in every family, every province, and every city. The Jews were not to fail to observe these days of Purim. The remembrance of them was not to cease among their descendants. So Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter about Purim. Letters were sent to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the empire of Ahasuerus, words of true peace, to establish these days of Purim in their proper times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established, and just as they had established both for themselves and their descendants, matters pertaining to fasting and lamentation. Esther's commands established these matters of Purim, and the matter was officially recorded. King Ahasuerus then imposed forced labor on the land and on the coastlands of the sea. Now all the actions carried out under his authority and his great achievements, along with an exact statement concerning the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king promoted, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus. He was the highest-ranking Jew, and he was admired by his numerous relatives. He worked enthusiastically for the good of his people and was an advocate for the welfare of all his descendants. Yeah. So, previously, the king had given Haman this day, this 13th day of the 12th month, as a day for the Jews to be utterly destroyed and annihilated. And that was the law of the land. And the laws of, Media and Persia were laws that once they were written, they could not be revoked. And as such, um, Queen Esther begs for, something to be done because she didn't want her people destroyed. So he says, okay, you can write in my name what you think is appropriate. And so they wrote a counter decree giving the Jews support to defend themselves against their attackers. And this was on the same day that Haman had originally chosen by lot, that is by Pur, to destroy the Jews. So couriers rode out and made this known to everyone in the provinces. And Mordecai was given second in command as well. So they, on this day, they ended up destroying, I think, some 500 in the capital and 75,000 throughout the provinces, including the sons of Haman in Susa, which Esther demanded that they be hanged as well. Which also, again, they were sons of Amalek. Many have criticized Esther for this, saying it showed a lack of love towards her enemies. Yet she displays the same principle found so often in Joshua. She would not settle for less than total victory. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting, too. You have this holiday of Purim being established. Well, on the 14th for those who are in the country, and on the 15th for those who are in the city, because Esther asked for another day for the Jews to be avenged from their enemies, and they couldn't rightly dispatch messengers throughout all of the provinces to say, hey, it's okay to do this another day, in just the few hours between this day and the next. So it was only essentially in the city that they were able to continue on the 13th and the 14th, and on the 15th they rested. So, but I was just thinking how throughout the Old Testament you have people reflecting back on what God has done for his people and having them as days of remembrance, essentially, for the people of God. And like you have instances of lots of reflection back towards Egypt, where God brought them out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and things like the Passover being done as a day of remembrance of them being freed from their slavery in Egypt. And later on you have, things like God delivering them from Og and Sihon, and as they're getting closer to the Promised Land. And you have things like Pur here, where God saves them in the Medo-Persian Empire here. From Spurgeon, it has been well said that the Book of Esther is a record of wonders without a miracle, and therefore, though equally revealing the glory of the Lord, it sets it forth in another fashion from that which is displayed in the overthrow of Pharaoh by miraculous power. Yeah, think of all that God arranged in the story of Esther. God arranged for the noble Queen Vashti to lose her place. God arranged for a competition to replace Queen Vashti. God arranged for Esther to enter the competition. God arranged special favor for Esther among the other women. God arranged for Mordecai to have access to both Esther and the affairs of the kingdom. God arranged the lot that was cast to give 11 months' warning before the evil event. God arranged the decree, command that the Jews be killed by private hands instead of by the army of Persia, which would have been much more difficult to stop. God arranged that Haman restrain his anger and not kill Mordecai immediately. God arranged for Esther to delay her request, first asking for a banquet with the king and then another banquet. God arranged for Haman's anger to come to a peak on one particular day. God arranged for King Ahasuerus to have a sleepless night. God arranged for Ahasuerus to pick up a certain book in his sleepless night. God arranged for Ahasuerus to read the passage about Mordecai in that particular book. God's will is accomplished, and yet men are perfectly free agents. Haman did as he pleased. Ahasuerus did what he wanted. So did Mordecai and Esther. We see no interference, no coercion. They all do their free will and bear full responsibility. Yet God works out his eternal plan for the ages through it all. There it is. Man is a free agent in what he does, responsible for his actions, and verily guilty when he does wrong, and he will be justly punished too. And if he but be lost, the blame will rest with himself alone. But yet there is one who ruleth over all, who, without complicity in their sin, makes even the actions of wicked men to serve his holy and righteous purpose. Believe these two truths, and you will see them in practical agreement in daily life, though you will not be able to devise a theory for harmonizing them on paper. From Spurgeon. Carrying on, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 27 through chapter 13, verse 13. Now, you are Christ's body, and each one of you is a member of it. And God has placed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, gifts of healing, helps, gifts of leadership, different kinds of tongues. Not all are apostles, are they? Not all are prophets, are they? Not all are teachers, are they? Not all perform miracles, do they? Not all have gifts of healing, do they? Not all speak in tongues, do they? Not all interpret, do they? But you should be eager for the greater gifts. And now I will show you a way that is beyond comparison. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but I do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophecy, and know all the mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith, so that I can remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything I own, and if I give over my body in order to boast, but do not have love, I receive no benefit. Love is patient, love is kind, it is not envious, love does not brag, it is not puffed up, it is not rude, it is not self-serving, it is not easily angered or resentful. It is not glad about injustice, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But if there are prophecies, they will be set aside. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be set aside. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when what is perfect comes, the partial will be set aside. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I set aside childish ways. For now we see in a mirror indirectly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I have been fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Paul sums up his previous point. Even as a human body is a unified whole with many different parts, so also is the body of Jesus Christ. Now Paul will write about the different parts of the body. Apostles, these are special ambassadors of the church. Paul and others in his day had a unique apostolic authority, which will never be repeated because the foundation of the church has already been set. Prophets, these are those particularly called to speak forth for God with the gift of prophecy. If one will either claim or receive the title of prophet today, let them be held to the standard of a prophet, 100% accuracy in every word. workers of miracles, those used of God to do miracles. Yet the biblical pattern is for miracles to be done on the Holy Spirit's initiative, not the initiative of the individual. Helps. This has in mind those who help or assist others in doing the work of the Lord. Spurgeon on those with the gift of helps. It strikes me that they were not persons who had any official standing, but that they were only moved by the natural impulse and the divine life within them to do anything and everything which would assist either teacher, pastor, or deacon in the work of the Lord. They are the sort of brethren who are useful anywhere, who can always stop a gap, and who are only too glad when they find that they can make themselves serviceable to the Church of God in any capacity whatsoever. In John Bunyan's book, The Pilgrim's Progress, help came to Christian when he was mired in the slough of despond. That is often when the gift of help is most useful. Dear, very dear to us, must ever be the hand that helped us out of the depth of the mire, where there was no standing, and while we ascribe all the glory to the God of grace, we cannot but love most affectionately the instrument he sent to be the means of our deliverance. And then Paul in the next chapter highlights the importance of love. That is, if these mighty things are not done with love, they're not worth anything. Paul uses the ancient Greek word agape. The ancient Greeks had 4 different words we could translate love. It is important to understand the difference between the words and why the Apostle Paul chose the Greek word agape. Eros was one word for love. It described, as we might guess from the word itself, erotic love. Storge was the second word for love. It referred to a familial kind of love between a parent and a child. Philia is the third word for love. It speaks of brotherly friendship and affection. It is the love of deep friendship and partnership. Agape is the fourth. It is love that loves without changing. It is a self-giving love that gives without demanding or expecting repayment. It is love so great that it cannot be given to that it can be given to the unlovable or unappealing. It is love that loves even when it is rejected. Agape love gives and loves because it wants to. It does not demand or expect repayment from the love given. It gives because it loves. It does not love in order to receive. Carrying on. Psalm 37, verses 1 through 11. Do not fret when wicked men seem to succeed. Do not envy evildoers, for they will quickly dry up like grass and wither away like plants. Trust in the Lord and do what is right. Settle in the land and maintain your integrity. Then you will take delight in the Lord, and he will answer your prayers. Commit your future to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will act on your behalf. He will vindicate you in broad daylight and publicly defend your just case. Wait patiently for the Lord. Wait confidently for him. Do not fret over the apparent success of a sinner, a man who carries out wicked schemes. Do not be angry and frustrated. Do not fret. That only leads to trouble. Wicked men will be wiped out, but those who rely on the Lord are the ones who will possess the land. Evil men will soon disappear. You will stare at the spot where they once were, but they will be gone. But the oppressed will possess the land and enjoy great prosperity. Yeah. Even if it looks like the wicked are succeeding for now, ultimately, they will be recompensed for what they've done. So. Carrying on, Proverbs chapter 21, verses 23 through 24. He who guards his mouth and his tongue guards his soul from troubles. Proud, haughty, scoffer are his names, who act with insolent pride. Insolent pride, not good. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a good day. Bye.